With this video, we're going to take an anthropological look at religion, magic, and superstition. And we know that religion has an incredible impact on the rest of our cultural lives, even if we as individuals are not particularly religious. Just think about how religion influences politics, or health policy, or marriage rights. Everything and everyone, it seems, is affected by religion in one way or another. So, from an anthropological perspective, religion is the belief and ritual concerned with supernatural beings, powers, and forces. When we say supernatural, we simply mean anything that is outside of the physical, observable world. The supernatural includes things that can't be held in your hands, that can't be tested in a laboratory. And these supernatural forces may or may not interact with the physical world, depending on the belief system that we're looking at. But religion is more than just the supernatural. It's also the relationship between the supernatural and the people who believe in those supernatural forces. So religion is as much, if not more, about the believers as it is about the belief. For our purposes as anthropologists, because religion is about the people who believe, we're just going to go ahead and take the perspective that, like, whatever a group believes, cool, that's what's real. It really doesn't matter to us as social scientists whether or not what people believe is true or provable. The fact that people believe it to be true is all we need to go on. It's not our job, it's not our right, it's not our responsibility to try to point out, errors or, logical inconsistencies in someone else's religion. It's not our position to point out how someone's religion does or doesn't make sense. It would be super ethnocentric. Our job is simply to understand what role religion plays in the cultural and social life of the group. To study religion as an anthropologist, we of course look cross-culturally to understand how religion varies across groups. And we look at not only what people believe, but also how they practice their religion. So we're looking at the doctrine of religion, how it's organized, who gets to participate. Are there priests, shamans? Are women allowed to participate in all or just some of the rituals? What are the prayers like? What myths or stories exist to support those religious beliefs? Religion is a cultural universal. All human societies have religious beliefs or a history of religious belief. Even the most secular atheistic societies today have these robust religious histories. Think of Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway. Today they report very high rates of atheism. But those are also the folks that gave us the mythology of Thor and Odin and Valhalla. So every human culture has some sort of religious history. The other part of studying religion through anthropology, we need to recognize that the divide between the natural world and the supernatural world, it's not always clear or obvious. In some cultures, the supernatural is like that thing over there. It doesn't really affect our daily lives. It's just, we know it's there, but it doesn't really bother us. But in others, the supernatural is intimately involved in individual and community life and well-being. One thing that we can say cross-culturally about religion is that it's something that's shared by groups of people. You can't have religion of just one person. There has to be a community behind it. And in many religions, people meet as groups to share in their religious activities. So we're talking about going to temple, going to mass. And a couple of things happen when people come together and worship in groups. The first is called communitas. This is the intense feeling of solidarity and unity that comes from worshiping alongside other people. If you're going to the same church each week, sitting with the same people in the same pew, those people can become like family. That's communitas. The other thing that can happen is called effervescence, which is the collective emotional high that people get when they worship together in groups. Effervescence can include singing, dancing, clapping, speaking in tongues, or catching the Holy Ghost. It's that really worked up feeling that people get when they do their religion together. And this word effervescence, it's wonderful. It makes me think of like Alka-Seltzer or Efferdent, right? It's like the tablets that you drop in the water and they start bubbling up. Effervescence is literally that emotional bubbling up, that frothing up that can happen when people do religion in groups. Some groups are more effervescent than others, but effervescence contributes to the overall feeling of communitas. And this is also where religion has its strength. Because of that feeling of solidarity, religion can really bring people together who would otherwise perhaps not intersect or not have some sort of shared identity or shared goals. So, for example, think about Catholics. What food does a Catholic eat? What language does a Catholic speak at home? Well, they can eat any foods and they can speak any language and they can wear any kind of clothes because any kind of person can be Catholic. But it's that shared religious identity that brings them together and that gives them, as this large religious group, gives them some sort of power. In the same way, religion can divide people who might otherwise share all of those aspects of identity. We can imagine two different families, living side by side. They raise their kids together, parents have the same jobs, they speak the same language, they eat the same foods, kids have sleepovers. But if those two families are different religions, that might be enough for, if the kids grow up and fall in love, they might not be able to get married. They might not be able to start their own family together because religion can be enough to separate people, to put a divide down between people who are otherwise extremely similar. So religion brings people together, but it also drives people apart. And we can come up with a million examples of that in our own modern world system. One question that we might ask from the anthropological side of this is, when and where did religion begin? We know it's something that all human cultures have today, but when did it start? We have to assume that religion predates all of the major religions of the modern world. Religions today that are the most common have origins within the last 2,000, 3,000 years, some a little bit more, some a little bit less. But we can reasonably surmise that religion goes further back than that. But how far back? Since the first humans appeared 300,000 years ago? Or further? Or more recently? Well, it's really hard to say because beliefs don't fossilize. Ideas don't fossilize. So instead, we have to look for some representation in the material culture of societies that might indicate a belief in the supernatural. We'd want to look for things that have a symbolic function outside of a purely utilitarian function, right? So it's like, I'm not going to find a fork and say, oh, clearly this means religion. I want to find something that doesn't have a practical use in everyday life, that has this extra layer of symbolism on top, and maybe that might indicate something about the beliefs of that particular community. So one area where archaeologists and anthropologists have focused a lot of their energy is on art, and early art, because it's really clear in religions of the modern day and also within history that art and religion are extremely intertwined. So in Western Europe, for example, there are these really beautiful cave paintings, images of animals that are depicted on cave walls that were clearly created and visited by early human occupants of the area. Maybe these represent supernatural entities, or they tell important stories within the cultures of those humans. On the bottom right corner of the screen, we see a particular painting from the Three Brothers Cave, the Trois Frères Cave. It's sometimes been interpreted as a shaman, which is, a shaman is like sometimes a medium or a witch doctor, we might call them. And that's because of the combination of animal and human characteristics that we see. This creature that's depicted here has the antlers of a deer, the beard of a goat, the front paws of a lion, the body of a horse, the legs of a human, the tail of a horse, and a backwards-facing human penis. The combination of those human and animal features is typically associated with shamans because shamans are seen as having, they're bridging the divide between the natural and the supernatural world, and that brings in a lot of animal iconography, and animals kind of bridge that divide as well. So maybe these cave paintings are representing important myths or shaman figures within the community. There's been a lot of attention also paid to these so-called Venus figurines that you see at the top right. These are found throughout a lot of Western Europe, and they often feature these very overt female reproductive characteristics. So one hypothesis is that these represent some sort of magical, the life-giving qualities of women. Maybe this is a Mother Earth goddess, and it's showing that the people of the past venerated women for their ability to create life out of nothing. And you know what? All of that could be true. It might be true that what we're seeing here is evidence of early religion. But we know that people paint on walls outside of religious contexts. If we think about graffiti, sometimes people write on walls to say, hey, I was here. But sometimes graffiti can also be artistic. And we also know that images of the female form or representations of the female form exist outside of religion. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Barbies and Bratz dolls are meant to be incorporated in a religious context. So I'm not going to go into all of the ways that cave paintings and female figurines might be interpreted. There have been a lot of interpretations over the years. All I want to do is illustrate that while cave paintings and female figurines might indicate religion, they don't have to, right? They don't have to have that meaning. Also, if we're talking about things like rock art or cave painting, we have to remember that these images exist outside of Europe. So we've got the Apollo 11 cave in Namibia, many examples of Australian Aboriginal rock art, and certainly in the Australian case, these have a religious significance to them. But it's important to remember that if wall art or cave art does mean something about religion, it probably has some deeper roots in prehistory, going back to our shared African ancestry. Another type of remains that could be useful in understanding or identifying early religion would be burials, because the ways in which people treat their dead often reflect something about their beliefs and what happens after death. But even still, with this, we might not be able to identify what people believed specifically. Instead, we could only identify that they believed something. Now, Edward Tyler was a British anthropologist who lived a century ago, and he hypothesized about what the earliest religions might have looked like. He recognized that humans all over the world are very good at picking up on patterns, very good at observing the natural world and trying to explain how and why things happen the way they do. But one of the things that would have been very difficult to understand without knowledge of medicine or science or anatomy are dreams. Because dreams are weird, right? Even with everything we know today, with all of our neuroscience and EEGs and whatnot, we still have these ideas about what dreams are and where they come from and what they mean, right? If you dream about a fish, it means that someone's pregnant. If your teeth fall out in your dream, it means someone's going to die. We put all of these extra layers of meaning onto dreams. And Tyler suggested that people were trying to understand what dreams could possibly mean in this context of, you go to sleep and all of a sudden you see these pictures in your head. He suggested that people came to interpret dreams as sort of an extension of themselves, that each person is actually two entities in a single body. We have this one, active daytime person. This is our corporeal body we're walking around in. But then there's another inner part that's active at night or when we go to sleep. And this inner part can come out of our bodies and go on its little adventures while we're sleeping, and then it climbs back into our bodies when we wake up. This inner part that has its own magical adventures at night, this can also be known as a soul. And then, to extend that a little bit more, if our souls climb out of our bodies at night and go on adventures, and I see you in my dreams, that's my soul meeting up with your soul and having coffee. Sometimes souls don't come back into the body, and that would be death. So it's it's understandable how he would draw these connections between trying to understand what dreams are or what it is we're seeing when we're dreaming, and then the growing belief in the soul. So essentially, Tyler is saying that the belief in souls came from trying to understand dreams. Animism is the word that we use for this belief in souls, and it comes from the Latin word anima. Animism is the belief in spiritual beings, which includes souls in humans, but also in animals, or rivers and mountains, and these spirits, these souls, exist and continue in their own spiritual realm, which can coexist alongside the physical realm. Animism is the simplest type of religion that we see in the world today. There's no gods, there's only spirits. And it's found in some non-industrial groups like foragers within recent history. So Tyler suggested this may have been the first type of religion in the world, the belief solely in souls. Need to find another word besides soul there. Tyler suggested that this might be the earliest type of religion. Now, just a little side note, I am not saying here that souls exist. There's no tangible, testable evidence that souls exist. And I'm also not saying that they don't exist. But we're just talking about animism. I'm only saying this is how people might have come to believe in souls, whether they're real or not. But of course, it doesn't really matter because we're talking about religion as anthropologists. It only matters what people believe to be true. All right, so animism as a type of religion is the simplest type of religion we see in the world today. We also see that the relative complexity of religions increases as social complexity increases. So as societies get bigger and more complex, so does religion. moving from animism at the simplest level into polytheism, which is a belief in multiple gods, and then into monotheism, the belief in a single all-powerful God. These trends don't hold in all cases, but it is a general pattern that we see, that the more and more people you have in your society, the more likely your religion is going to become more and more complex. In many societies, the supernatural also exists as this impersonal power in the world, and it can affect people's lives, but it's neither negative nor positive with its intents. That is, the supernatural is this energy that sort of exists in the world, and it's not for you and it's not against you, but it can be controlled by people under certain circumstances. The term mana comes from Melanesia in the South Pacific, and it's used by anthropologists to describe this energy or power that exists in the world. Mana can be imbued in objects or animals or plants or even people. Good luck charms and sacred relics like rabbit's feet or the Holy Grail have similar power, or rather are believed to have power, and owning those items confers power on whoever owns them. That power can also be transferred from one person to another. And there are actually these crazy stories of like different churches in the Middle Ages or whatever. Like groups of monks would roam around to the other churches in the area, and they would steal their religious artifacts. They'd steal their relics because they thought that if they had the religious item, whether it was the veil of the Virgin Mary or a nail that was in, the cross that Jesus was crucified on, or the Holy Grail, or, whatever it was, they thought that if they had those items, it would bring prosperity to their parish or their community. So we can see here that these sacred items are thought to contain some sort of power in them. And ownership of those sacred items is then also used to explain differences in power or wealth. So people will say, oh, well, of course that guy has so much more stuff than me. Of course he's got more money. He's got that special mana plant or that special mana necklace or whatever it is. And, he's lucky that he has that, but I don't have to feel bad about myself for not having all that stuff. It's just because he has that sacred object. And if I had the sacred object, I'd have that stuff. It's not because it's not because he's better than me. It's not I'm worse than him. He's got that thing that gives him more wealth and power. An extension of this concept is that of magic, where people try to control the supernatural power that exists in the world to benefit themselves or others, or maybe to hurt others. But they do this by conducting a specific technique or ritual. So magic can include spells or incantations or even prayers. An attempt to control the supernatural energy by performing a specific act would be considered magic. So a pretty widespread type of magic, and maybe it's even secular at this point, meaning it's not tied to a specific religion, but a widespread type of magic that we can see in the United States is the use of sage smudges, which is pictured in the top right here. Sage smudges are a way of cleaning negative energy out of a space, like a new home. So you'll see, people walk into their new house, they just bought the house or renting a new place, and it's like you have to go from room to room burning this sage to release or clear out any negative energy. And then the home is ready to move into. So that would be considered magic because you're doing a particular technique to accomplish a specific goal. You're burning the sage in order to release the negative energy. Another particular kind of magic is called imitative magic, where a person produces their intended effect by imitating it, typically in a smaller form. So an example of this that we all know would be voodoo dolls, where a small little effigy is like poked and prodded, and it's sort of a stand-in for whatever your target is. So whatever you do to the doll, it's supposed to cause harm to the person that you're, mad at, or the person you want to suffer. That's an example of imitative magic. And I think we can probably all think of little forms of magic that we do, whether it's carrying a lucky charm, on a necklace, or maybe there's a lucky pen that we use on exams. We try to control the chaotic world that we live in through these little acts. And this is really where the real power of magic lies. It's as much about soothing our emotional and psychological needs as anything else. It gives us a feeling of control. And then we start to see patterns in that. When our magic is successful, when we use the lucky pen and we get an A on the exam, it reinforces our belief that we can control this chaotic world that often feels uncontrollable. And if we don't get the intended result, maybe we did the magic wrong. We're just going to have to do it harder next time. So we see the ways that magic works, and we can discard the ways that magic doesn't work, because it helps us. It's like, giving ourselves kind of a big hug, a magical hug, to say, I'm doing everything I can to make this world work for me. So we talked a little bit about rituals. Now let's go ahead and define them. Rituals are formalized events that are meant to remind the participant of important stories or moments in the religion's history. They're often simplified, stylized, and repetitive. They occur at the same times and places, and everyone in the group knows the steps and what they signify. Think about something like communion in a Christian church. It happens in the same way every time. It happens in the same place each week or each month. The ritual reminds everyone involved of, the sacrifice of Jesus by recreating it in miniature. Every religion has some sort of ritual. You do certain things in a certain order, and then it either makes something good happen or it helps remind you of sort of why you're all together. Another common element in many religions are rites of passage. These are the ways that individuals within the community transition from one stage of life to another. So for example, a quinceañera in some Christian communities, or a bar or bat mitzvah in the Jewish tradition. Rites of passage typically include 3 distinct stages. There's separation, where the individuals withdraw from the group that they're in, and they begin their transition to the new group. And since we're talking about moving through life stages, that separation phase would be like starting to step away from being a child, and you're moving towards being an adult, but you're not there yet. Next is liminality. That's the time between the stages where you're not a child, you're not an adult, you're just sort of in limbo. And then there might be some, religious rituals that are associated with that. And then comes incorporation, where the person re-enters the community as members of the adult class. In many religious communities, rites of passage are group events where individuals move through the stages together. Like, for example, in collective circumcision among the Maasai of East Africa, where every few years, all of the boys in the group that are aged 16 to 20 go through circumcision at the same time, and they become men together. This promotes that sense of communitas that is so important for the strength of religious groups. And similar rites can be found in non-religious communities, like the process of joining a fraternity or a sorority at college. That also has rites of passage where you have to, accomplish certain tasks or move through those stages of not being in the fraternity, and then finally you are allowed incorporation. Now I want to wrap this video with a little bit of a sidestep. Because, of course, as anthropologists, we study what it means to be humans, and that includes our biological origins. Now, particularly in the United States, this can be seen as a potential source of conflict with religious belief. For some people, believing in religion means they can't believe in science. And conversely, for some, a belief in science means they can't believe in religion. And now I'm not advocating one way or another, but I want to just introduce this concept of non-overlapping magisteria. This way of thinking is an attempt to reconcile the conflict between religion and science by illustrating that a conflict doesn't have to exist. This idea was advocated by Stephen Jay Gould, a prominent and very influential American scientist, who said science and religion do not glower at each other, but interdigitate in a pattern of complex fingering, meaning that there doesn't have to be conflict. Science and religion can be understood as 2 distinct magisteria, or areas of inquiry. They're separate ways of knowing, separate ways of understanding the world. So science can look at the natural world and religion can look at the moral world. In other words, rather than thinking that we have to choose either science or religion to answer a question, we can separate the two, and they don't have to intrude upon each other's spaces. Science answers the questions of how. How are we here? And religion answers the questions of why. What is our purpose in life? And of course, there are criticisms to this concept because religion often does try to explain the natural world. It tries to answer those how questions. And science is often used to explain behavior, including things like morality. But I think bringing this up is a nice way to sort of end this video, and important because if you're thinking that there has to be a choice between the two, maybe this is a way of instead seeing that there could be value in both of these ways of understanding the world. All right, so we're going to end there, but follow the links on the right to get to the next videos in this little religion series on religion and social control, and also religion and social change.